So, good afternoon, everyone here and digitally, and welcome to this session that's going to be about how digitalization and partnerships will accelerate the transition in the marine industry. I'm Katarina Paulsen, and I'm the Vice President of Sustainability at Alfa Laval, and I will be moderating this session. For some of you, Alfa Laval is a very known brand, but maybe not for all of us. Alfa Laval is a Swedish global company that in essence works with three key technologies: heat transfer, fluid handling, and separation technologies. These technologies serve customers in the energy sector, in food and water, and in the marine industry. And today we're concentrating on the marine industry. Before I introduce my speakers and the stars of the show, I thought I should give you some facts about Alfa Laval as a well-established vendor in the marine industry. So actually, Alfa Laval's role in the marine industry started already 100 years ago when the Navy asked Alfa Laval for a solution for separating fuels on board vessels. And our core technology, separation, was used for this solution. Today, Alfa Laval provides more than 20 types of product solutions to our customers in the marine industry. Not only that, you can almost say that Alfa Laval can provide anything on board in a vessel, maybe except the engine then. 70% of commercial vessels worldwide actually have some type of Alfa Laval equipment in their vessels. But now to the stars of the show. So, on stage digitally, we have Søren Andersen, who is the CEO of StormGeo, a new acquisition for Alfa Laval. Peter Nielsen, who is the president for one of our business units called Marine Separation and Heat Transfer. And Dr. Markus Hoffmann, who is not only the business unit manager of that business unit, but also a member of CMAC, ISO, and the Center for Zero Carbon Shipping, as well as our own expert on fuels. So, Søren, in June this year, Alfa Laval acquired StormGeo, that is a global leader in weather intelligence and advanced data science solutions. The acquisition was actually a part of Alfa Laval's strategy of supporting the marine industry's efforts to make operations more efficient. Mr. Andersen, could you give your view on the role digitalization will have on the decarbonization of the marine industry, please?
Sure. Thank you very much. So digitalization, in my mind, is not an end in itself. It's not an objective in itself. Digitalization is a tool to achieve an objective, and that objective, of course, in this context, is decarbonization of shipping. We all know that digitalization today plays a role in almost all of the various activities and processes that we do as human beings. So I'm quite sure that digitalization will be an important part of decarbonization. But I also want to say that digitalization today is already contributing to decarbonization. Using digital tools and data science can enable shipping companies to become more efficient and reduce their CO2 emissions already with the fuels and technologies we know today. But I'm sure that digitalization will be important when it comes to evaluating the different opportunities for fuel and for propulsion methods. And it'll be important for sourcing those fuel and for using those propulsion methods, just as it is to some extent already today. And of course also, I'm convinced that over time ships will become more and more connected, have more and more frequent data exchange with onshore companies. So that means we will become even better at understanding what happens on board the vessel at any given point in time, and that will also drive efficiencies. So digitalization will be super important, just as it is in many other things in society today.
Yes, that's very insightful. And as industries move away from fossil fuels, the information StormGeo provides will be even more valuable, right? StormGeo's climate knowledge and passion for protecting natural resources helps its customer make environmentally responsible business decisions. In your opinion, what will be the most important steps for the shipping industry in the coming years?
Yeah, I think there are three very important steps, and the two of them are related to decarbonization. I think the first one is to, as soon as possible, have a carbon tax or carbon levy introduced. If you look at the work that the Maersk Mc-Kinney Møller Center for Decarbonization of Shipping has done, you can see that this is not happening without some sort of carbon tax on emissions. And I think there, the challenge for shipping is that it's a rather conservative industry for good reasons. But I think it is needed that governments help, in a sense, shipping through the transition with some sort of carbon levy. The challenge around that levy is it has to be fair, it has to be perceived as fair. And when I say fair, I mean that, of course, the movers need to be rewarded. There needs to be some incentive to change and go towards decarbonized fuel. But at the same time, the laggers, the slower movers, can't be perceived as being punished too hard, because there are still many shipping companies out there who every day go in and compete on cost and have to run a very efficient operation. And that is not particularly conducive to innovation. So I think that there has to be a balance, and that balance needs to be found pretty quickly so that we can start having the carbon tax incentive to push companies towards decarbonization. I think another important challenge that we're facing is, as we're moving away from carbon fuels, where are we going to move to? And of course, right now, that is a very open question. Maersk has ordered ships that run on methanol. Ammonia is also an opportunity. What kind of fuel? And Alfa Laval has wind propulsion also as an opportunity. What is the industry going to converge around? I think that's a challenge, and I would think that, hopefully the shipping companies that are successful are the shipping companies that provide the best service to their customers, not necessarily the shipping company that chooses one fuel over another, and others choose another fuel, and that whole system becomes very muddy and complicated and difficult to maneuver. So I think that's the second big challenge over the coming years. And then I want to say the third big challenge for shipping companies is how we treat our crews, the crews on board the vessels. We've seen how critical they are to the shipping business through COVID, how difficult it was for companies to change crew members, for example. And I think their digitalization can help. We can automate more on board the vessels. And that means that we'll be less under pressure from crew changes, and also from the conditions that crews experience on board vessels. They need to become better. So I think those are three critical challenges over the next 5 to 10 years for the industry.
So if we have three challenges, what is your vision of StormGeo's future product development?
Yeah, so already today, we offer products that can enable shipping companies to reduce their emissions. And it's actually very easy to use those tools, because you don't have to install equipment on board. You can basically download our tools and start using them more or less overnight. And that's very important for us, that it's accessible technology that any company can use, no matter whether the ship is in port or at sea. We can start doing this work. And of course, my vision is that we go from where we are today, which is a lot around operation of vessels, and into the whole chain of shipping, so that when you select your ship, when you select your cargo, when you select where to bunker your fuel and even what type of fuel it is, when you decide how fast you go to reach port, we predict how ports are doing, how they're behaving, in a sense, so that all the steps, all the activities that a shipping company goes through, that we can be there and help make that more efficient. So my vision is a lot about everywhere we can help a shipping company, that's where we want to be.
Sounds like we're ready for the future, Søren. And we're ready today.
We have to be ready for the future, absolutely. Thank you.
So, Peter, the IMO has set ambitious targets for decarbonization. We see, as Søren was pointing out, an array of fuels, right? Everything from ammonia, hydrogen, methanol, even batteries, and even wind propulsion. They are making a comeback, and Alfa Laval and Wallenius Marine have actually joined forces to supply wind-powered vessels in a 50-50 joint venture. This is called the Alfa Laval Ocean Bird. But over to you, Peter. Could you please share your view on why partnerships, not only in your own sector, but also across societal sectors, is essential to ensure that the race to zero becomes a success? And not only a success for some players, as Søren was pointing out, but for the whole global community. So, Peter, I think you're muted.
I am not now, right?
Perfect. We are ready to listen to you.
Yes, Katarina, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. I mean, it's obvious that if we want to make a real impact, then we need to work together. If experts within their own field don't share knowledge with each other, then we don't get anywhere, or at least we don't, get there quick enough. And as you were saying, I mean, shipping is responsible for 2-3% of the global greenhouse emissions. And if this industry was a country, we would be the sixth biggest polluter in the world. The International Maritime Organization, or IMO, has targeted to reduce 50% of vessel-generated gas or greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 compared to 2008. And if we want to reach that type of reduction, I think the industry needs some disruptive solutions, and our wind-powered solution, Ocean Bird, is an example of that. And it's not only Alfa Laval, a marine equipment supplier and a ship owner, Wallenius, that is partnering together to realize this. We cooperate with academia, such as the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, or SSPA, a research institute within naval architecture. Both of those in order to, to do research within the field, but also with classification societies in order to develop a safe and a robust solution. All of that type of cooperation and partnership is needed to make this happen. And actually, Alfa Laval and Wallenius, we teamed up a bit more than 15 years ago, where we helped the industry to prevent the spread of invasive species in our oceans. So we developed a ballast water treatment system, Pure Ballast. And also then we work with universities, with test institutes, with class societies, of course, policymakers and other industry players. And now we are succeeding with that. So partnership is essential, and we intend to utilize the same here, Katarina, when we are gonna, utilize this free, abundant energy source, which is wind.
I'm so excited about the fact that we're going to use wind. But where do you, Peter, see the biggest potential with new technologies?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of new technologies are often tested, implemented in small scale, and in our case, that's small vessels or short distance voyages, coastal voyages, and so on. And all that is good, of course. I mean, every initiative we can take to push the transition is positive. But if we really want to make, the most difference and have a real impact on the environment, we need to implement these technologies on, big vessels, doing long voyages across the oceans, transporting thousands of tons of cargo and burning a lot of fuel. This is where we can have, the biggest impact. And luckily enough, this is also where we can, get the full potential out of wind energy as a power source.
That's exciting, and I think we are planning actually to use this wind propulsion not in that far future.
Yeah, let's see. I mean, we have quite an ambitious schedule for this, and the plan is to by 2025 have an ocean-going vessel sailing. And that might sound a long time ago or far ahead in time, but it's really not. So by 2025, this one is going to do across the ocean. Yes.
I'm very excited about that one, Peter. Let's hope wind is blowing in the right direction for this to come quickly to the market. But I also know that there's a couple of decision makers that need to contribute so that this happens, right? Not only in the wind propulsion arena, but in your view, which political decisions could contribute to an increased use of clean energy sources? Because they're quite an important actor in this arena, right? So just give us your perspective on what decisions could contribute to an accelerated rate of this implementation.
Yeah, thank you. And I mean, if politicians really decide to take the climate issue seriously, there are a number of tools. And as Sören was mentioning here, I think that's sort of the first one, or starting with, would be to have some sort of levy on CO2 emissions. It's still too cheap to burn oil or fossil fuels. So if we really want to push the transition, a levy on CO2 emissions is a strong tool to do so. Then you could, of course, limit or put a cap on CO2 emissions. That would be another option you could use. And I would say finally we could even put an end date on when it's no longer allowed to utilize or to burn fossil fuels in shipping. I mean, technically today, it's possible to put other energy sources or utilize other energy sources, not, of course, to replace tomorrow, but it's possible, and we will use other energy sources in the future, I'm convinced. So the question is actually how quick do we want that transition to happen? So the important thing is that we put rules and policies in place to push that transition, and those hard decisions we need to make now.
Yeah, and talking about where the end date will be, I know that the IMO has targeted a 50% reduction of vessel-related greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 from the 2008 baseline, right? And through the call to action for shipping decarbonization from the Global Maritime Forum, we, Alfa Laval, and co-signatories are actually asking governments, as what you were, Peter, alluding to, for a robust approach to climate change, and actually maybe to also set a closer timeline. To meet this target, the industry must shift to new types of fuels. Dr. Hoffman, you are an expert of fuels in Alfa Laval. Do you think you could give us a summary of your thoughts on how this transition can gain that momentum that Peter was asking for?
Yeah, thanks, Katarina. Well, first of all, as you said as well, I think we first have to set the right targets. We have today the strategy from the IMO to reduce the CO2 emissions or GHG emissions by 50%. If you think the shipping sector today emits more than 1 billion tons of CO2, that will probably increase quite a bit in the coming years as the world is growing, the population is growing, and shipping is the key to trade and transport goods in the world. So we joined recently more than 150 other stakeholders within the marine industry to say, like, we need to align also in this sector with the Paris Agreement, and that means we need to have full decarbonization in 2050. That is number one. But then, of course, to reach full decarbonization, you need to consider also the lifetime of a vessel, which is more like 20, 30 years. And that means also, like in 2030 on, we need already fully zero emission vessels on the sea. To your question, then, how can we accelerate that? Because it's not very far away, 2030. First of all, as the other speakers have mentioned here as well, like, I think we have to close the cost gap, because fossil fuels are cheap. They have maybe increased quite a bit over the last couple of months with oil prices, but they're still much cheaper than other alternative fuels in the market. And that cost gap has to be closed. And there are different ways of doing that. And I think most economists and scientists agree that probably some kind of carbon pricing is the right way of closing that gap. And creating incentives as well to use other kinds of fuel types. So to really get it going, we really need to focus on the different fuels that you could use that come with zero emissions. And that also means you cannot just look at the CO2 emissions you generate by, for example, burning a fuel on a vessel. You need to take into account the whole life cycle of that fuel. It doesn't make sense to produce a certain hydrogen, for example, from natural gas or coal or oil, and then have zero emissions on a vessel. So we really need to look at the whole picture. And in that part of transition, I would say that standardization is also a really important factor to driving this change forward. And we at Alfa Laval, we were active as well in the ISO, in the International Standardization Organization, where we are working on standardizing fuel qualities, because the standard is, you can see it, it's a commercial contract in a way, but it's also a technical contract, because it makes sure that the fuel is safe to use and it can be used also on board of a vessel. And here we're really working also with a lot of different stakeholders within the industry, from fuel suppliers, engine builders, class societies, ship owners, equipment builders, to look at all these different factors of these fuels and to come up with a standard. And work is going on biofuels right now, which we believe also is one of the easiest ways, probably because these fuels exist already. There is also infrastructure there, as they are used on the automotive sector as well. So this is definitely something that will come. And then also, as mentioned as well, other fuels like methanol are gaining traction as well. And there also work is going on as well to deliver, based also on the experience from these first movers that are out there, the right standards to make it also easier for wider engagement in this kind of technologies. And I guess at the end it is really also it's all of us as well who can accelerate it, because it's the customer demand also that can drive the change. So I think also recently a lot of consumer companies transporting their goods, of course, on their vessels also set their guidelines that they want to use zero carbon shipping and are willing to pay a little bit more for that transport. And I think that's in everyone's hands. And also in Alfa Laval, we made also our target is also to fully decarbonize our supply chain by 2030, and with intermediate targets that we follow up. So really going ahead with that.
You have mentioned a couple of the diverse fuels that exist in the marine industry, and I have a little bit of a curiosity about. I know that Alfa Laval is looking at this multiple fuels, and I'm a bit curious. You talk about standardization on the one hand, but how does Alfa Laval look at, why is that important to look into all these different fuels, and how are we thinking about who is going to win the race, and what's your outlook on that?
Yeah, and the problem for marine is, in a way, there is no silver bullet out there. We don't know what is the perfect fuel for each ship. It's different than in the automotive sector, where now, after many years also with fuel cells and other technologies being invested, it seems like that the battery electric vehicles are now the way forward. But unfortunately, we need transport over long oceans, and therefore batteries, unfortunately, don't work because they have a very low energy density. So we need fuels with a higher energy densities. Yeah, unfortunately, there is not just one fuel out there that can just provide that solution. So different fuels probably will find different homes depending on what kind of segment you're operating in, what kind of distances you're sailing. Ships, for example, like ferries cruising shorter distances can employ different fuel technologies than ships going crossing the Atlantic, for example. So we at Alfa Laval, we're trying to be the partner to all our customers to support all the different fuel technologies out there. So we're working with fuel cells, we're working with methanol, we are developing ammonia fuel systems, working with biofuels, especially also when it comes then more to energy efficiency measures, we're working with air lubrication and a lot of other things as well. Yeah.
That puts a lot of pressure on a company that is developing technologies in these areas, right? Because we need to be quite flexible in the approach we have. So I come right now from being part of a panel about innovation. What do you think is the biggest barrier to actually make these technologies come into play? I can ask any of you guys to maybe pitch in on this. What do you, from your perspective, what's the big barrier to make these fuels come into the market? Because there are a lot of them, like you were all mentioning. But of course, at some point, these need to come into the market and into the shipping industry in order for our technology to make a difference from a decarbonization perspective. Maybe Marcus, do you want to start, as you still have you unmuted?
I can start with that. No, but what is the biggest barrier? I would say it is probably resistance, because we're talking here about a change that is needed, and change always, requires energy, and you have to move in some uncomfortable area, and that is exactly what we need to remove. We need to de-risk the first movers. So we need to give incentives to the people who are actually willing to try new technologies to develop these things. I think that's the biggest and most important thing, to make it easier for them. And then you can also regulate more and come more with policy measures, because then the technology is there, and also reference cases that a safe technology is available.
What about you, Peter? Do you have any thoughts about what the biggest barriers to decarbonize shipping is?
I was thinking of what could I add to Marcus, because he is giving a very, very good answer. But I mean, so the conservative part we have been through. I mean, and this is probably why, politicians can play even a bigger role in this industry, because this industry really needs a push as such. So here, we are back to this with some sort of tax scheme or something that really push the transition, because there is a big inertia in the industry as such. Then of course it's availability of fuels, and also majority of technology, but that will come as I'm sure it's coming as the demand comes, so to speak, and we need to, as Marcus was saying, also helping the first movers, the ship owners that really, want to make this transition. So let's try to help them make that. Maersk is making, as Søren was saying before, a big step by going now on methanol, for example. Even though it's a risk taking on maybe on the supply side when it comes to fuels, but they are taking a very important and decision to go ahead. So but that will come. But we need to help those and probably in one way penalize others that are not willing to move. And this is back to the balance that Søren was talking about before. How to do that in a very fair way.
Søren, the biggest barrier is obviously lack of digitalization, isn't it?
Again, I think digitalization can help us get there, right? I think my two colleagues have been very good in their answers. I guess if you think about shipping, then it's a business-to-business industry. The consumer doesn't see what shipping company moved the good. That means that it's pretty hard to differentiate as a shipping company, right? Whether you use one shipping company or the other, the consumer will never really know. So that means it becomes a lot about cost. And that means the most cost-efficient shipping company in the short run is also the shipping company that survives. And of course, that means it's hard to find capital for R&D or for different sort of introducing new technologies, or in a sense that there hasn't been much surplus profit in the industry for those type of investments. And I think that is a fundamental challenge. It's interesting to see that it's in the container business that we're seeing big retailers, big brand names come out and say they now want to have decarbonized shipping. That's of course because they know the consumer cares. But for tankers and bulk carriers, where that's very far from us as consumers, that same natural pressure is not there from the market. And I think that's why there is a need in shipping for government interference. And I think we have a positive example actually from the IMO 2020 when that was introduced. See, when I watched that happen, and I was in a shipping company myself, it seemed sort of draconic that the IMO suddenly said, in 2020, you have to use low sulfur fuels. And the industry was not particularly preparing, actually. It sort of happened in the last moment, but it did happen. It did work. And that's why, with that sort of decisiveness, the industry will absolutely adapt and change. I think the other point also on the conservatism, that it is a conservative industry, but there's good reason for that. So if you ever go sailing on a ship, and you'll see that what the crew does, a lot of their working hours is make sure that the ship can sail, right? That's the one thing you want to have when you're on board a vessel out in the middle of the Pacific. It should not break down. And that means that, if you introduce new technology, well, are we sure that technology is credible? Are we sure that technology can take us through that journey across the Pacific? Are we sure we want to change? So it is, in a sense, in the DNA of the industry. So we do need some help, and I really hope that it's possible for governments to come together in the IMO and find a fair solution quickly, because then it will happen.
Yeah, I really see your point about, well, you've all touched upon it, the standardization, importance of standardization, and you've all touched upon the importance of the cost in this perspective and in the transition. But maybe if I go back to you, Marcus, what would you see as your key message towards government? You've touched upon it, but maybe you have one key that will enable a robust approach to climate change. Because I do agree with you that since this industry is not pushed that much by other actors, we sort of see a bigger role for government, right? I think we agree on that. And maybe, Marcus, you can give us your perspective, since you're part of these associations that actually are a little bit of a push towards government.
Yes, Katrina. I would say it's three pillars, I think, that we expect from governments to support here. So first of all, we need the commitment to decarbonize the shipping sector by 2050, to really bring it in line with the Paris Agreement, and by that, as well as Søren mentioned as well, this comes then into the hands of the IMO, who is regulating today the global shipping market, and they need to take that into account when they will present the new greenhouse gas reduction strategy in 2023. That a faster decarbonization is needed, but they also need to come out with the right measures and intermediate targets, that we really have a clear pathway of doing that, and not just a target that is 30 years into the future or something. So we need to really have a clear and implementation plan available in 2023. The second one, also what we touched on also, is that we really need to support the first movers. So we need to have, we need to drive this scale-up projects, bringing the technology from the lab into large installations and actually getting it on board. And it's not just on the vessels, so we need to support the vessels, but we also need to support the infrastructure on shore. So that means the port infrastructure, for example, that may be needed to be changed for taking on certain other fuels and so on. And of course, we need to look at the fuel production as well. So really providing the incentives and supporting the first movers. So this is definitely one of the key areas as well, where support from governments, or where really the governments can come in. And the third one, I would say, is to deliver the policy measures to make zero shipping the default choice already in 2030, because as we said, we need to get these vessels out already in 8-9 years to be able to decarbonize the sector in 2050. So of course, then it can be discussed, what are exactly these policy measures? Is it like a regulation? Is it in the beginning? Is it a certain carbon pricing mechanism? But we need to have these trading schemes, or whatever it comes to, already available in, I would say, in 2025, so that we can expand the schemes and we can increase the prices to reduce this cost gap between the different alternatives. Yeah, so I would say it's these three different things, really, like commitment, support, and then also the policy measures.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Before I go on to some concluding remarks from my side, I think that we have a question from the public, and maybe could I ask you to get the mic, and maybe you could introduce yourself so that the people that are digitally know who you are.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Jan Christoph Nepirski. I'm head of regulatory affairs at the Maersk McKinney Møller Center for Zero Carbon Shipping in Copenhagen. And thank you very much to all three of you for your very, very good points, and not at least also the good partnership with our center. Allow me one comment and one question. The comment is, I very much agree, the hour of truth is not 2050, it has to be 2030. In 2030, we need 4 elements in place. It's very good energy efficiency, and your project, Søren, is a very good element of this. We need upscale of fuels to a much higher level. We need regulatory solutions, and there especially market-based measures closing the fuel price gap, and furthermore the agreement on absolute zero in 2050 and the according goals in 2040, 2030. And then not at least, we need the first movers. We need green corridors. We need first mover projects that entail the whole value chain end to end. And what we need there is trust among partners, trust among companies that usually do not open that much. But if we don't get there, then it will be extremely difficult. My question to you is, we form part of Mission Innovation on Shipping, as you know, and we agreed on the targets of 5% alternative fuels in 2030 and 200 deep sea ships. And your first mover project with one ship makes us being in 2025 left with 199 to go. Is that a realistic target or not? My question to you. Thank you.
So any one of you guys want to answer the question?
I think it was a question for Peter, wasn't it, with the 2025 wind propulsion?
Thank you, Søren, for that one. We have. Is it realistic? Why not? First of all, you should always have. If you don't have ambitious targets, then you will never get there. That's one thing. But I talk about this the first sailing vessels in 2025. I think it's highly likely that you will see some semi-solutions even before that. You will see maybe more wind-assisted solutions even before 2025. There are some out there already, of course, but I think we will be seeing more. So our own ambition would be to maybe not have this as 2025 as sort of the first, but that's going to be a completely sailing vessels. But there will probably be out solutions before that. I hope that when we reach 2030, we have come to a position where this is not a unique, happening. We are talking much more in terms of vessels that is actually using this technology as an example. And I strongly believe that's the case, because what we can see now, we are talking about a car carrier, right? But because of the obvious connection with Wallenius in one sense, but also due to the vessel itself. But if you talk about a tanker and a bulker, this is equally applicable, I would say. On container vessels, it will be a little bit more challenging. There you will see, I'm convinced we will see wind-assisted solutions for containers, but you will probably not see a fully wind-propelled container vessels for cargo reasons or cargo handling reasons, right? But tankers and bulker, and that's the big mass of the fleet, and doing long voyages and long transitions. So and all the simulations we have done, you have a lot to gain, irrespectively if you are sailing Europe over the Atlantic, over the Pacific, even from South America to China, or China to Australia, etc., etc. So there are many routes where this is applicable, and I think we just need to prove, of course, and to build a trust that you were saying that this actually works, and it works well. So of course these first movers, it's important in many ways to push the transition, but also, they need to be successful as well in order to build the trust that we need to have established in the industry. But I think by 2030, we should see quite a few of wind-propelled or wind-assisted vessels for sure.
Thank you very much for that, Peter. And I think I move on to my conclusions from what we have heard Søren, Peter and Marcus talk about today. We have tried to give a snapshot of the importance of digitalization and new fuels to accelerate the transition to decarbonize the marine industry, right? And we realize that some of these exist today, but really to cross the finish line of this race to zero that we're all here in Glasgow to listen to is going to require partnerships, it's going to require investments, and it's going to require commitment. And talking about commitment, as a sustainability responsible in Alfa Laval, I of course can't avoid saying that we are actually also committed to reaching carbon neutrality by 2030, as Søren mentioned, by 2030, and not only ourselves in Scope 1 and 2, but across the whole value chain. And I can tell you this also requires partnerships, and it requires that the full value chain is pushed into the transition to decarbonization, including the marine industry, which is actually also part of our value chain, because we also transport a lot of our goods across the world's oceans. So, as Peter explained, we have a track record of making partnerships count, not only in making the solutions to get the market, but also in terms of the impact these have on the environment. I'm really excited about Oceanbird and that partnership, and I am really looking forward to 2025 when we will see that sail off a harbor sometime. As Søren points out, digitalization is a crucial enabler already now, but actually also for the future, right? And Markus, Dr. Hoffman, clearly takes us back to where we are today, Glasgow, COP26. We need governments to commit to decarbonize shipping no later than 2050, but we also need national action plans to scale zero-emission projects, and we need governments to incentivize first movers. If we don't do this, by 2030, we will not have the technology to reach this decarbonization that is needed by 2050. At Alfa Laval, we're quite convinced that we need to act now and take steps to ensure we accelerate the rate of decarbonization of the marine industry. I think we're ready to innovate, we're ready with the technology, we're ready with digital solutions, but we cannot do it alone, and we need partnerships, technology, innovation, and financing to make it happen. Alfa Laval's company mission is to accelerate the success of our customers, people, and planet. The success of our planet requires that we act now, together. Alfa Laval is clearly ready with solutions that exist today and for the future. We have the technology and the knowledge that is needed. We need to partner with other sectors and with other actors in the marine industry. Please do let us know how we can contribute to decarbonize the marine industry before 2030. Thank you, guys, and I wish you a great afternoon this Saturday. Greetings from Glasgow. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.